Oh, happy day, everyone! Today, I officially end my seasonal review on the infamous Season 7 of Spongebob. So let's take that first step with the next episode on the list, The Masterpiece. Oh, how hard it is to take that name seriously when it's in a season like this. This episode is about the Krusty Krab losing business to a rival restaurant due to the restaurant having a statue for kids to climb on. So he recruits Squidward to make him a statue for the Krusty Krab. Now, when I started this seasonal review, I talked about how this season ended up getting less time to make more episodes, which could have been a big reason for a lot of the lazy, boring, or just downright horrible episodes from this season. Well, this episode feels like it's confirming that when Krabs gives Squidward 1 day to make his statue.
Art does not march to a ticking clock. Art shall come when art is good and ready. So,
I could be looking too deep into that, but if that is a reference to the staff's time limit to make episodes, that's a pretty damn ingenious jab, and I so hope that's what they were doing. But even if it wasn't, there's still some decent moments here. The scene where SpongeBob goes undercover is pretty entertaining, and is even capped off by a very funny policy the restaurant has. Also, as you can probably predict, Squidward ends up making the worst possible statue for a kid to climb on. But this is one of those cases where the mess-ups are fully thought out. Now, I didn't catch this the first time I watched this episode, but Krabs never told Squidward he had to make a statue for kids. This was his request.
Someone to create a glorious, towering statue of my likeness.
Yeah, all he asked for was a statue. In fact, his selling point was telling Squidward that more people would see his art. So, technically this mess-up isn't even on Squidward. That's a level of subtlety on par with the first 3 seasons. Unfortunately, there is something that kind of weighs this episode down. It's pretty padded. The sculpting scene drags on, the start of the episode is a bit slow, and you could probably argue Krabs gets treated unfairly, but honestly I never felt like it went overboard with him. He still had his unbearable moments, and his punishment felt kinda fitting, as well as had an ironic twist to it. And while I don't see this episode being too memorable, I think it's worth a few watches. Not a masterpiece, but it could have been a lot worse.
don't move a muscle.
How long am I gonna have to stay like this?
Well, now we move on to Whelk Attack, which is about giant sea whelks invading Bikini Bottom and running amok, eating all the residents. So SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy team up to try and defeat them. Now this is one of the season's more action-oriented episodes. Like, right from the start, shit gets real and it only takes a few breaks here and there. It's pretty well paced, actually. There's also some recycled jokes in here, like the Ravenous joke from Born to be Wild, but they do what you should do if you're gonna recycle a joke. They make it different enough to fit the situation, and different enough to where it's clear they actually have ideas that warrant recycling it. Which, for the record, is something they don't do with the characters. They keep the characters exactly how they should be, and don't change them up to fit the plot. I mean, I guess it is a monster episode though, and those are usually good about not changing up the characters. Well, okay, yeah, but that's by no means that episode's biggest problem. I guess if I had to nitpick some things from it, I'd probably nitpick the reveal of what made them this way.
So these things went crazy just because they had the sniffles?
Yeah, I just think they could have been a little more creative with that. And there's also the fact that some civilians are eaten by other whelks, yet all of them still appear in this mother whelk. But again, that's just nitpicking. Overall, this is a very entertaining, engaging, and fun episode. It captures the rush of a monster-centered plot, and it has a lot of unique twists and turns that make it stand out for the right reasons. An all-out attack of straight-up enjoyment.
The gang's all here.
We're closed. Come back tomorrow.
And we follow up that bit of awesomeness with a bit of crappiness as we move on to You Don't Know Sponge, which is about Patrick miserably failing a quiz about his best friend, making SpongeBob think he doesn't appreciate him and feeling like Patrick isn't actually his friend. This episode is right up there with Hide and Then What Happens in terms of laziness. But whereas Hide and Then What Happens was the most boring episode, this is the most nothing episode, because everything in it is dragged out and stretched. They basically turned 2 minutes worth of entertainment into an 11-minute episode by using the other 9 minutes to pad everything. The quiz goes on for almost half the episode, and 95% of it is just Patrick doing this.
Oh, tricky.
Blue! No! Clear! No! Oh, that's not it!
Also, I don't think the setup is a DOA setup. Even though the audience knows Patrick is an idiot, we also know that SpongeBob doesn't, so it's believable that he would feel this way since he's so ignorant to Patrick's stupidity. But they do nothing with this setup. It's just SpongeBob constantly crying to either his friends or to the audience. And it's so void of effort that, if anything, it feels like another episode that thinks the audience will just eat up whatever they put in front of them. Now, does this episode have any redeeming qualities? Well, they get a few good jokes at the start, like when Patrick and SpongeBob are making dolphin and whale sounds.
That song, it sounds just like Martha.
Frank, how many times do I have to tell you? Martha's no good for you. She's just no good.
Yeah, that's actually a funny joke. I mean, it's still padded as hell for them to get to the joke, but at least it's a pretty good payoff. I also found this line from Patrick humorous.
Yeah, it made me look more smart-like.
But other than that, no, there's nothing redeemable here. It's another episode that, at best, is forgettable, at worst, is monotonous. I may not know Sponge, but I don't think I want to.
Is your best friend a boy or a girl?
Pass.
Well, next is Tunnel of Glove, which is about Pearl and SpongeBob getting stuck on the Tunnel of Glove at Glove Worlds. Yeah, that's really all you need to know, because nothing else happens. Oh, I take that back. Patrick has his own little B-plot, but I'll get to that later. Now, this episode feels like a mixture between The Chaperone and Love and Cheese from Hey Arnold, which actually sounds like an awesome mixture. But in typical Season 7 fashion, this episode doesn't seem to know how to make it work, because it's another forgettable episode. A lot of it is filled with just straight up underthought elements that you can easily tell are only there to pad the time. Like Pearl's friends, for example. They're just your generic teenage airheads that are only there to make you say, "God, what a bitch." Yeah, not exactly like that, but you know what I mean. They're just there to be unpleasant.
SpongeBob, stand here for a second.
Also, Patrick's B-plot? Good God, was it obvious. There was no effort there. Every single thing in it was forced or, again, repeated. Patrick misreading the door. It's almost exactly like the ice cream scene from SpongeGuard on Duty. Patrick forgetting what SpongeBob looks like. That's basically one of the most used jokes for Patrick. Patrick not knowing what the electrician is saying. I mean, the dialogue feels like it was written in 10 minutes and is clearly using the Patrick's a moron thing as a crutch to excuse lazy writing. I mean, maybe Patrick trying to act tough would be charming to some people, but for me it was obnoxious. The only passable thing, surprisingly, was SpongeBob and Pearl, but again, they're just passable, because there's still obnoxious, lazy tactics used here, like SpongeBob going on and on about his man crush on Krabs, that the episode, in an obvious attempt to be meta, acknowledges is boring.
I was upset because my snail Gary, he was sick and he let me leave 5 minutes early. Isn't that the sweetest thing you've ever heard? 2 very boring minutes later.
I mean, I don't consider this episode necessarily bad. I never felt angry watching it or anything. I think it has its fun moments, and I do like that Pearl gets a little payback on her friends, even if the payback itself feels a bit forced. But overall, it's underthought, it's unengaging, and it's an easy episode to tone out. A tunnel that leads you straight to dreamland.
As time quickly runs out, still no word from the imperiled whale girl and SpongeBob.
Oh no! I'm out of coral on a stick!
Now we move on to Krusty Dogs. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I remember seeing the advertisement for this episode's debut all the time. In fact, I saw this episode advertised more than any other episode from this season by the time it came out. It's about SpongeBob making a hot dog-shaped patty that ends up becoming huge. So huge that Mr. Krabs drops Krabby Patties off the menu entirely. Yeah, I admit, if this was pre-movie Krabs, I'd be docking points for making Krabs out of character, as he's shown countless times how much that sandwich has meant to him. But since this season's Krabs is a mostly one-dimensional greedy prick, this actually fits him. And they also establish that the customers are bored of the Krabby Patty, which shows some level of thought put into this episode. The creation of the Krusty Dogs also has some fun little creations before that I think are kinda neat. And the ending, it's fun. I actually enjoy the way this episode resolves itself. The trip up to it, however, that's another story, because everything else about it just doesn't work for me. The setup, again, is trying to do too much with itself, and the pacing is horrendous. It just flip-flops all over the place. Like how quickly Krabs replaces the Krabby Patties, as he does it only 2 minutes after SpongeBob introduces the Krusty Dogs. But other parts feel dragged out to add time, like SpongeBob's panic attack. It's very forced and was clearly just there to make the episode longer. Mr. Krabs, though I guess not out of character by Season 7 standards, is still very obnoxious here. The tone of voice he uses in some scenes is straight up grating.
SpongeBob! SpongeBob! Wake up!
God, that makes me want to deck him. And yeah, everything else falls into the boring, forgettable category. Now, I know most people remember the, well, let's call them what they are, dick jokes that Squidward makes.
Right, something that would make Mr. Krabs' whole wiener thing blow right up in his face.
And to be fair, I don't actually think this is a bad joke. I mean, they use it literally to solve their problem, which is great writing. But this effort only seems to come at the last minute. Squidward as a mascot, I mean, I'm sure some people will find that funny just because of the sight of it, but they don't do anything with it other than make the generic stay-in-school jokes you hear when seeing something like this.
It's never too soon to start picking a good college, Billy.
And as a whole, the episode feels, at best underwhelming, at worst intolerable. Anyway, I've gone on enough about this episode, so let's just end it here by calling this episode a typical 2-star experience. Any chance I can get a refund?
You're back in your old kitchen, and the paramedics were here to revive you.
I was asleep.
Well, hopefully our next episode, The Wreck of the Moanaloa, will break up the streak of bad episodes we've had. It's about SpongeBob and Patrick stumbling upon the wreck of an old ship named the Moanaloa, and Mr. Krabs finds out about it and recognizes it as a sunken ship he's been searching for a long time. Why, you ask?
Legend has it that the largest unfound pirate's booty lies in its ruins.
So Krabs follows them to the wreck, only to discover it's actually the remains of an abandoned amusement park. So right off the bat, this episode is much better than the 3 that preceded it. The humor is pretty good. SpongeBob and Patrick, while having their moments, are still pretty entertaining to watch. There's some good comeuppance Mr. Krabs gets that are actually deserved, and yeah, it's just an overall fun episode. There are some moments that feel a bit forced, like SpongeBob and Patrick being incapable of keeping a secret. But again, it never hits ridiculous or cheap territories. Honestly, it manages to cut itself off right before it hits those territories. The pacing here is also great. Every scene feels like it gets the time it actually needs, and isn't relied on to stretch the episode out. Which is great considering there are actually a lot of ideas here, but every single new direction this episode takes feels very smooth and meshes well with the episode. It's kind of like what Karate Star could have been if it managed its ideas a little better, and kind of like Pull Up a Barrel, it's nice seeing that pirate side actually come out of Krabs, even if it is for only a brief moment. So yeah, overall, this is a good episode. It's funny, it's entertaining, and it has a ton of rewatch value. And it's a nice little breath of fresh air after so many wrecks before it.
Patrick, can you keep a secret?
Nope.
And now we move on to New Fish in Town, which is about Patrick renting out his front yard and a fish named Howard wanting to rent it. And as it turns out, Howard and Squidward have a lot in common, right down to one very important key trait.
I can't stand living near anybody who jellyfishes, but luckily they're not the worst type of neighbor. That would be the bubble blowers.
So the rest of the episode involves Squidward trying to keep SpongeBob and Patrick away from Howard so he doesn't change his mind. Now I actually kind of like Howard at the start. I think it's actually kind of cool seeing Squidward meet someone he relates to, and I think the idea is pretty solid. I mean, aside from Squidville, I can't think of any other episodes that ever attempted something like that. And in this case, they completely botched it. Once SpongeBob and Patrick come back, the episode's focus is almost entirely on the way Squidward keeps them away from Howard, and they're honestly very dull. And when Howard does eventually find out what they're doing, his change from hating them to loving them is one of the most forced moments of the season, and that's saying something.
You there. Hey. That actually was kind of fun.
I mean, I kind of expected Howard to change, but I didn't expect it to be at the very last minute on something so minor. Honestly, I figured Howard would find out about them earlier, and after being unable to get them to stop, would team up with Squidward. I mean, hell, it's about time Squidward wasn't outnumbered by these two. But no, if anything, it feels like they didn't want this episode to be anything more than generic at best, because I don't know how you don't get the idea to turn this into a genuine face-off. Overall, it's another episode that has hardly any real substance, but I guess that's nothing new for this season.
You come back here.
Well, after failing to get a good neighbor, let's see if Squidward can at least get the girl in our next episode, Love That Squid. This episode is about Squidward meeting the girl of his dreams, and I'm pretty sure that's the same girl whose boyfriend Squidward was messing with in Squidville. And he gets nervous because he hasn't been on a date in a long time. So SpongeBob offers to help him out by organizing a practice date. If you mess this up, you better retire, because that setup is too perfect. Now first off, yes, it's a rehash of Krusty Love. In fact, it even copies some of Krusty Love's jokes.
I don't understand.
Is that Salmonese?
But like you should do if you're rehashing an episode, they make creative changes that make the jokes more their own. Also, the setup of SpongeBob and Squidward being on a date, this episode definitely knows how funny it is and what jokes work with it. I mean, it has its slow moments, but there are some great subtle jokes in here. Like, listen to Squidward's reaction to SpongeBob's directions to their restaurant.
Now at this stop sign, turn right.
Okay,
Now at this light, make a right.
gotcha.
Then at this street here, make a right. And then at this intersection there, make a right. And then park right near that orange building just up ahead.
He stops talking halfway through it like he's already realized what SpongeBob's doing. I will admit Squidward's crush isn't the best developed. I mean, she's really nothing more than Squidward in drag, because they have the exact same personality. But at the very least, she's not actually in it that much. We mostly have SpongeBob's portrayal of her for the episode, which allows them to get away with this.
Aren't you going to compliment my outfit?
You look stunning.
Oh, you're so sweet.
And you know what? It makes sense that Squidward would fall in love with someone just like him. He's his own biggest fan. Anyway, overall, this is a good episode. It's got its own set of issues and can be a bit slow, but due to its funny and subtle jokes on dating and the sheer genius idea of SpongeBob and Squidward being on a date, this is an episode that's worth a few watches. And who knows? You might even end up loving it yourself.
She's gaga gaga. She's gaga 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 gaga. She's wow.
Well, now we move on to Big Sister Sam, which is about Patrick's big sister, 3 guesses what her name is, coming to visit. But it turns out Sam is nothing more than a more one-dimensional Patrick, and she starts wreaking havoc on the neighborhood, specifically on Squidward. Now I know Something Smells established that Patrick didn't have a sister, but seeing as this is season 7 and it's already clear they don't care that much about continuity, I'm not going to count that against this episode. Trust me, there's more than enough bad to pick apart here. Starting with the most obvious problem, Sam herself. They don't even try to make Sam interesting. I get they're trying to make her a menace, but she just does the same thing over and over again. She breaks stuff and hits people. That's it. That's all this character does. You can't get any less creative than that. And this isn't like Love That Squid, where it's okay because she's not actually focused on that much. Sam is the main focus of this episode, so even if you don't find her obnoxious, you can't really find her that entertaining either, because there's nothing to her. I mean, how long can you actually hear that voice before it gets annoying?
House too small. Make bigger.
Also, this episode shamelessly tries to make you think Squidward is the bad guy. I mean, you could probably argue that Sam is supposed to be the antagonist, but Squidward gets treated like it more than she does. Sam is treated more like a misunderstood creature. Like, every action she does, she's only doing because she doesn't know any better. And that's more of an insult to the audience thinking they'll actually fall for that. And yeah, Patrick's no better in this episode either. It's the exact same problem with Karate Star, where they tried to make Patrick have an arc, but they have to force the arc in by making him an unreasonable asshole the whole episode, and always defending his sister's actions.
I have had my fill of this thieving brute.
Oh, how dare you call my sister a thief? Just because she took some of your thing.
Oh, and speaking of lazy writing, look how SpongeBob finally gets Patrick to grow a pair.
She destroyed my house in a fit of rage. She needs to control her temper.
I guess she can get a little carried away.
Even out of context, you can tell that's cheap writing. He just saw all of this happen and defended it, but it takes SpongeBob verbally describing what she did to make him realize she's a menace. Yeah, I think I said all that needs to be said about this episode. It's easily one of the worst of the season. Even if you can forgive all of these issues, there's nothing here really worth defending, because it'll never be anything more than an episode to watch only to kill time. But I think most would agree that when it comes to episodes like this, you're better off staring at a blank screen for 11 minutes than watching something as insultingly lazy as this.
that it's a teensy bit unfair that Sister Sam dismantled Squidward's house?
No, I don't. Not even a teensy bit.
And finally, we're ending the seasonal review with perfect chemistry, which is kind of bittersweet for me because this is an episode you can make a good argument for being the best episode of the season. But it's one I've already talked about in my top 10 best SpongeBob episodes from season 6 through 8 list. So, to sum up what I liked about it, I thought it was one of the more creative and smart episodes of the show. The way they get their gas jokes in are simple, but perfectly executed. The team up of Sandy and Plankton is a great team up, and more importantly, there's a good reason given for this team up. And the comedy, in general, comes in a variety of ways, and all of them work very well. So yeah, that's really all there is for me to say about this one, and like I said in that video, there's a reason perfect is in the title of this episode. It's one of the more perfect comedic episodes of the show. Say whatever you want about this season, but I will give it credit for finishing strong. I just wish the chemistry had been this perfect from the first episode.
Ooh, I gotta go to the bathroom.
Ugh. Neptune's trousers, Squidward!
And just like that, we are done with this seasonal review. Now, what's this season's overall score? Yeah, well, that's easily a new low for the seasonal reviews. In fact, it's not even close. But honestly, I expected this to be a bit lower than it turned out to be. With a score at least above 5, it means this season was more forgettable than anything. It means it had its flashes of brilliance, but for the most part, there wasn't too much here worth remembering. And yeah, I think that would sum up this season. It had some hidden gems, some episodes that were better than I remember, but the majority of its episodes aren't all that memorable. And a good portion of the ones that are memorable are usually for the wrong reasons. And compared to the better seasons from this series, this is easily one of the biggest black marks of the series' history, and it's a season I'm really glad they eventually learned from and improved on. I may eventually do season 6 just to see which of the two score worse for me, but until then, I'm actually going to go back to reviewing some good seasons. Now, last time, I had you guys vote on which season you wanted to see, and it was really close between this and Steven Universe Season 1. And because it was so close, I think it's only fair my next seasonal review should be Steven Universe. Now, I'm not going to do Season 1. I've actually decided to do Season 3 for the next seasonal review. Mostly because I'm not doing 52 episodes. I just did 50 here. So yeah, after a few top 10 lists I have planned, I'll be moving on to Season 3 of Steven Universe. And until then, thank you all for watching. Thank the sweet Lord above that I made it through this season alive. And I'll see you in the next review.